Good morning, dear friends. Thank you that you are here with us for our very informal meeting. But before we will start our conference, I want to ask you to think about our heroes who died during this war, and I want to ask you for a minute of silence for them. Thank you very much. And I think minute has to be real minutes, and they deserve much more. Thank you very much that you are here. This is a very important day for us, and we decided to organize this very informal meeting for you. We 20 years ago founded Yalta European Strategy, our conference, which we like this tradition to gather this conference every year, already for 20 years. And I hope we will have this conference at least until Ukraine will become a member of the European Union and NATO. But this very informal conference we gather already second year, and frankly speaking, I really hate this tradition, and I want to stop to gather this informal meeting for 24th of February. I hope that maybe it will be last conference. Maybe not, maybe we will have a few more, but we have to make everything possible and to make this meeting for 24th of February last. And thank you, you are here mainly for that. There are two reasons from my point of view why you are here. First, this moment in the world has one of very interesting specificities. Everybody intellectually, theoretically understand that Ukrainians fighting not only for our independence, but also for freedom, for values, for all the world. But this understanding is mainly intellectual, but this is not yet under your skin, not under the skin of our Western partners. And for this understanding, deep understanding, you have to be here, you have to feel. You have to talk with our heroes. We have many heroes in this room. Thank you very much, our hero. Thank you very much. We have to talk with Ukrainian people. You have to get this under your skin. This is first. And second, what's important, I already said this, as engineer, I like to make very simple formulas, and my formula for this period, year 2022 was year when everyone underestimated Ukraine. 2023 was year when, unfortunately, everyone underestimated our enemy. And year 2024 is a year of truth, moment of truth. And what it means, our enemy understand, for them this is existential. But this is not yet understanding among our Western partners, not yet. You have to get this feeling. This is existential also for you. Only then we will have the chance to protect our independence and win this war, win for us and for you. This is our victory, but for that you have to deliver this message to our leaders, our governments. This is existential. I really think that very soon we will stop to talk about your help, your aid. We have to talk about partnerships with just sharing of responsibility. Our responsibility here in Ukraine, Ukrainian soldiers, Ukrainian people, we have to fight here. Unfortunately, for us, you cannot send your soldiers to be with Ukrainian soldiers, but you can produce weapon. You can produce weapon not as much as possible as we need, and you have to send this weapon to Ukraine as quick as we need, not as possible, but as we need, and only then we will win. I wish you productive day in Kyiv, in Ukraine, and I wish you interesting, productive exchange. And with this, I just have to say thank you for your attention. And Karl Bildt, member of our board, and he is our moderator. Karl, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thanks, Victor, and thanks for bringing us all here this important day. 2 years into war, which those in Moscow that started it thought was going to be over in 2 weeks, but Ukraine have defied all of their expectation and is continuing to fight. And the fight of Ukraine is the fight for all of us in the future. We have a large panel, to put it very mildly, a battalion-size panel, trying to give a first assessment of where are we in this war? Where are we heading? Which are the prospects? I think these are the questions that are uppermost in the minds of very many of us. And I've asked the different participants to be limited in their initial remarks so that we can have an exchange of views and, if possible, also to bring in questions. We also have some contributions coming in, both from the field and another contribution that will be coming to us in Ukrainian, but for the time being in English. But let's start with Ukraine. Oleksandr Kornienko is first deputy chairman of the Rada of the parliament, and the first opportunity is with you.
Thank you, Karl. Honorable guests, colleagues, General Minister. First of all, I would like to express my very, very warm and very important words to all Ukrainians who will be here us next time in results of this very important meeting. We're very thankful to Victor for organizing it. Why? Because all Ukrainians now, we are now in some strange situation. Because every day for these 2 years, and every night, because we have lack of time with some countries who support us, every day and every night we hear once more and more, this is existential war. This is existential war for values, for democracy, for freedom, for development, for European values, for universal democratic values. But when I become to front line, and when our heroes talking with the brothers and sisters from front line, we hear something else. Where is shells? Where is munitions? Where is packages of support? Where is package of support from one main country? How long will we need to wait all of this? In this time, we waste a lot of lives of our brothers and sisters in trenches. And unfortunately for me and for Ukrainians, it become rhetorical questions. I think these events and all our the same activities should to go into direct to make these questions not rhetorical but practical. What we can do more right now, but we understand that now it become not only I don't know, not only some simple exercise. It become more comprehensive and more sophisticated, because now we need to ask you and all your possibilities to help us to, for example, to receive one successful voting in one parliament in the world. Yeah, it become more strategic exercise. From the side of our parliament, our people, on behalf of our people, we want to ask of all this support today and every day. If we talk more close to the question of the panel, is the tide against Ukraine? I think many Ukrainians will answer you that we feel tight time to time for these 2 years, more or less, but like some waves. Because if you will remember first day of war, of full-scale invasion from 21st February, of course it was great time. Because for all of us, it was new reality, new life. We need to find a way how we can live in these conditions, how we can overcome with this, with security issues, with future issues, because many Ukrainians in 1 minute, in 1 hour, we lose our future. We need to understand it. But after that, we can remember time of the occupation, the liberation of Kyiv region. It was one of the big victory, first victory. And we felt some inspiration, and we felt our courage and possibility to overcome with Russia at all. And I can remember such ways every month, every quarters of these 2 years. But I think we need to talk not only about fact, is the tide against Ukraine fact. Of course it's fact. At all time Russia tried to keep stress to us in terms of military, but of course in terms of diplomacy we can discuss about it in this panel or today to the end of the day. But for my opinion, we need to discuss about what kind of tide every time we receive. Because we can observe some development of Russia tools on different directions. Russia become more efficient on battlefield. We can discuss about it. But Russia can become more efficient in diplomacy. We need to discuss about it. Maybe this honorable society will help us to stop it on these stages, that we can cut these possibilities right now. Is the tide against Ukraine in terms of economy? It's also a very big issue, because yesterday, I don't remember, yesterday we received 13 package of sanctions, and something like stopping to export-import generators and something small, but we still recognize Intel chips in Russian missiles. And we still recognize other Western components in North Korea missiles that we can find in our civilian infrastructure, buildings, etc., etc. That's why thank you very much for this opportunity, and I want to ask all of us to spend this day in such discussions that will give to us practical answers to theoretical questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Oleksandr Kamyshin is minister in the government and responsible for strategic industries. That's a lot of defense, but that's also a lot of the innovation that has been occurring with the help of Ukrainian innovative talents, but also some Western ones that we will hear from later. But Oleksandr, how do you assess the situation? Where are we?
Thank you, Mr. Bild. If we say that Ukraine is against the tide at this moment, I would tell that, yes, maybe you're right, but finally it's all about who is against the tide as well. Until we got some great people on our side, we care less about the tide itself. And who is on our side? I would name just a few people in the room that are definitely standing on our side, and meanwhile we are all together. The tide should care about standing against Ukraine. You can see Irina Salashenko in the room, who helped the medical volunteer who helped Ukrainian railways make the greatest story in the world with medical evacuation trains. That's another story that would be examined, researched, and learned after this war. She made that story happen. Thanks. You can see Nate Mook and Yulia Stefanyuk. These two people and their team helped feed millions of Ukrainians on the ground in Ukraine. He was shelled in Kharkiv, he was shelled in Kramatorsk, and many other cities. Stand up, Nate. And now you know what? Now he's leading the investment fund for Ukrainian defense tech. You can see Jean-Eric Dezagon, yes, who helped in the first year of this war stand with Ukrainian railways, finance reconstruction of tracks that not any single country of you present in the room could make in a peaceful year. We made it in railways in the first year of the war. Thank you, Jean-Eric. Natalia Gumenyuk, a lady who is documenting war crimes. The story she made on Kramatorsk railway station would be one of big cases in the court one day against Russia. You can see Oleg Gorokhovsky, who is in his mobile, and Igor Lochenkov, who raised over 300 million hryvnias in 1.5 days. And you know what? They will buy Ukrainian-made naval drones. That's another great story. 2 days ago, my president met 94 ambassadors. One of them mentioned 3 miracles in Ukraine. One was Ukrainian railways. Second was Ukrainian banking system. Again, did any one of you expected that when the rise of the tide comes on day one, that we will withstand with banking, we will withstand with railways, we will withstand with all the other things that keep running? You can see our government team. You can see our parliament team, our president's office team in the room, and all things keep running for already 731 days. That's only few of the whole people in the room I mentioned, and that's nothing to say about those people who make all the story run. Our military people, our warriors. So finally, maybe yes, maybe we stand against the tide, but we stand with honor and we stand. Thank you.
Thank you. After two Ukrainian voices to foreign voices. Start with Bob Seeley, Member of Parliament in the United Kingdom and Member of the Foreign Affairs Committee there, the House of Commons to be precise.
Дуже дякую за запрошення. Це велика честь бути тут. Слава Україні. Okay.
Thank you for inviting me. Glory to Ukraine.
I'm just going to ask some questions in 3 minutes rather than come out with statements, because I think that's the most helpful thing that Westerners can do. And I just want to thank all the British. We have a very large team of British parliamentarians here from all parties, and I think actually there's more that have turned up for the second year when times are tough than turned up for the first year. So thank you for them all for being here. Oleksandr, you made a great speech. I think there was too much optimism last year, and there's almost too much pessimism this year. But there are some massive strategic issues facing you, and the most important is supply of weaponry. And what I would say is that your most important relationship is with governments, but you need to keep telling parliaments and senior journalists and opinion formers around the world what you lack. You're expecting 1.5 million shells over the past year. You were promised 1 million by the European Union. 300,000 have turned up. That's probably one of the reasons why you've lost Avdiivka, and that's maybe why Liman and Kramatorsk are going to be under threat soon, because you're simply running out of ammunition and you're going to fall off a cliff at the end of March. There is a sense of urgency here, which maybe in the West we are no longer seeing, in part because of events in Israel and Gaza. This is a war where the kit that grabs headlines, like F-16s, you're going to have 20 pilots this year. I mean, there's a lot to be said about the lack of training in the West. If you have 20 pilots in 20 planes, that's going to make a difference. But bread and butter, the stuff that wins you the war, is artillery, 155 shells. How many barrels are you going to lose this year? 100, 200, 300, 400 barrels? Where are those replacements going to come from? You need to tell us these things so we can put our governments under pressure. This is potentially the first war, and General Wasley may have something to say about this. This is potentially the first modern war where air power, such is the tech in air defense, that it negates air power. And actually you may be stuck with a very old-fashioned style war when you're slinging bits of metal at each other, be it artillery 155 shells, or be it increasingly first-person view drones, which are going to shape this war. And Oleksandr, on your point about investment, we went to see some of your amazing drone factories. In a year's time, the second point I'd make, in a year's time, you've got to be thinking ahead. In a year's time, because you haven't got the troops that the Russians have, and there's a big question that you have to answer about conscription, about age. I know that's going through Parliament. I know there's so many amendments to it. You need to sort that clearly. But you also need to use artificial intelligence and high tech to help you. And with those ground drones, where you can maneuver, and these things are a little bigger than the size of this seat. They've got 4 wheels. You know, you can use them where your soldier is in the ground or in a bunker 100 meters away and can engage targets using this material. This will give you an advantage that the Russians will take another 2 or 3 years to catch up with. So you need to be planning ahead. Finally, just on the training package, sorry to be very tactical, but I just want to say productive things, because that's the best way that I can help. Some of my ex-military colleagues are training your girls and guys, and we're incredibly proud to do so. The training package is not long enough, and after 5 weeks, they're not going back in a ready state to fight. You need to reorganize your conscript and your military so you can give us a basic training package in the UK of at least 8 weeks, and then forward to additional training packages for 2, 3, 4 weeks at a time in comms, in reconnaissance, in these military intelligence, in these other skill sets that you need. And actually, if we're not helping you in the occupied territories, just a minor point, I was with Michael Ashcroft, I was in Kharkiv and Sloviansk in the last couple of days, so my phone's been turned off, sorry for folks, I know they were trying to get hold of me, apologies. We should be helping you in the occupied territories, because there's so much that we could be doing with sort of proxy war and special war that we're not doing, because you need to make life hell for the Russians in the occupied territories as well, and we should be helping much more with that. So I'll leave you with those 3 points, but thank you so much.
Thanks also for practical advice. And now Elliot Ackerman, who writes for the Atlantic major opinion-shaping magazine on the other side of the Atlantic.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here, and I will be brief because this is a large panel. and I'll talk about my area of expertise, which is journalism and storytelling. I think when we look at what's gone on in Ukraine, it reminds me of a truism, which is the only better answer a person can receive than yes is a quick no. And that the crime that the West has perpetrated in Ukraine so far is that the answer that's been consistently coming from Western capitals for too long has been what I would call the slow yes. So those F-16s are arriving, and they will mean something, but wouldn't they have meant so much more 18 months ago? Same with the Abrams battle tanks that are coming. And this perpetration of the slow yes is what has become incredibly painful. So when we ask ourselves, is the tide against Ukraine, it also comes to story. How are we framing this war? So is the tide against Ukraine? Well, if this is a war that is an existential war, that right now represents a contest between values that Ukrainians, Americans, Britons all hold dear, I don't believe that the tide is against Ukraine, because this isn't even a war that's about Ukraine. This is a war that's about all of us as united, free-loving peoples. But we have to get past this idea of the slow yes. And I think ultimately what people who tell stories need to do is to continue connecting the dots, that the person we are giving the slow yes to isn't only Ukrainians across an ocean, it's to ourselves. Because this war, whether we like it or not, will show up on our doorstep. And it's a war that's being waged right now between an axis of authoritarian nations against the freedom-loving peoples of the world. So I don't believe the tide is against Ukraine, because I don't believe the tide is against all of us in the West.
Thank you. Before we turn to a voice that we are supposed to have online from the front line and hear somewhat more on the military situation there, I'd ask Wes Clark, who's at the end of the line there. Wes is ex-general, was Supreme Allied Commander Europe some time ago, but is a well-known commentator also on military affairs in the US and well across the world as well.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you, Victor, for organizing this. President Krasnitsky, President Kuchma, it's great to see you, old friends here. Where are we? I think we're 2 years into a war that could last 6 years. I think we're 2 years into a war that will end when Vladimir Putin recognizes defeat, or when Russia collapses, or when the West collapses. I think we're 2 years into a war in which nuclear weapons have been threatened, and nuclear weapons may well be used. I think we're 2 years into a war in which it began in Ukraine, but it will consume the Middle East and possibly Asia. I think we're 2 years into a war in which the courage and fortitude of the people of Ukraine will be severely tested. You're going to have to mobilize. You're going to have to innovate. You're going to have to produce. And the best analogy to this and where you are right now is World War II from the Allied side in the West. The Brits and the French came in. They were quickly defeated and pushed out of France. In 1940, the war could have been over, but Hitler decided not to invade Britain. He turned east. Joseph Stalin insisted on a Western front. In 1942, the Canadians led a raid across the English Channel into France, and it was repulsed with 50% losses of 100 aircraft, 33 landing craft, and a destroyer, 6,000 men killed, wounded, or captured in 7 hours. It took 2 years additional for the Allies to invade successfully across the 20 miles of the British Channel. In the summer of 2023, Ukrainian forces charged toward Zaporizhia. You were hastened by America's impatience. We've given you the equipment, we've done the training, we did the war games, get going, what's the matter with you people? The 47th Brigade went down there. To me, it looked a lot like the 1942 raid at Dieppe. Now's the time for Ukraine to pull back, learn its lessons, work with the allies. Detailed planning, officer training, leadership training, reconnaissance. You've got to recognize the differences in this battlefield. Yes, artillery is important. You must win the electronic battle. You must control the electromagnetic frequency spectrum. You must use electromagnetic pulse weaponry. The Russians have it, you must develop it, and you must use it. You must use fiber optic cable to reduce your dependence on the electromagnetic spectrum. Yes, you need fleets of drones, but you need the ability to control that electromagnetic spectrum. If you do that, you will succeed. You must be able to blind satellites. Sorry to say this, I know there's people here who like satellites. Those satellites, commercial satellites, are being used by the Russians. If you want to do anything in Ukraine, you can't have the Russians using an American commercial satellite to spy on you. So what are you going to do about it? Now, I'm here to say unpleasant truths. This is the truth. There will be people pushing you for negotiations. And you know better than anybody in the West that a negotiation with Vladimir Putin is useless. He will build up. He will then overturn governments in Eastern Europe, and he will continue his assault. And this will not be limited to Europe. So the concept of democracy, liberty, and freedom that you are fighting for is part of a larger fight. And I think it's incumbent upon the West to recognize what Vladimir Putin said. He's in a war against the West. He's in a war against NATO. Why don't we in the United States admit it? We won't. You've got to help us admit it. And I want to conclude by not only honoring the bravery of the Ukrainian forces, the courage of the Ukrainian people, the military leadership, but also I want to thank our British friends and colleagues who have actually been the leaders in helping Ukraine resist. So thank you very much. I'm sorry Boris Johnson isn't here, but all you UK parliamentarians, thank you from one of your former colonists. Thank you very much.
Thanks, yes. So, thanks, Wes, also for practical and concrete military advice. Yehor Firsov is the deputy commander of the UAV strike force and is somewhere along the front line and is supposed to be somewhere in the digital space accessible to us. Does it work? Okay. Here. Yes. Welcome to the conference. How is the situation? Where are we heading?
I would like to greet you all, ladies and gentlemen. I am now in New York. It's not American New York, mind you. It's our Ukrainian Avdiivka. And an hour ago, I was actually at our line where we had enemy just before us. And when I was coming back to New York from the line, I was thinking about what I should say. And now I'm in the same state as our country, is that we should not be politically correct. We should not use equivocal language. We should be straightforward. Let me start saying with the situation, the morale in the trenches, because morale is the basis, is the energy, and then the weapons, the equipment, and tactics. So what's the morale? In 2022 and 23, we had a burst in energy and hope. Now in the trench, we have fatigue. This is clear. And the second point is anger. Anger against everything. And there are many reasons to be angry. quite frankly. Reason number one, in Avdiivka, it was difficult, and from our positions we could see there a town. It was very difficult there. We had to retreat because the enemy was total dominance in the air. And with the aircrafts, we could use our drones, tanks, our self-propelled artillery units. I was talking about Avdiivka. And we had to leave it because they used aviation on a massive scale, and our infantry had to receive more than 500 aerial bombs being dropped on their heads. We had nothing to use against the aircrafts. The aircrafts should be confronted with aircrafts, and we had none. And I'm talking about this information campaign with F-16s. We've been expecting them for a long time, and we were very hopeful, but now it's like just like a story. It's now it seems to be history. So we are not just angry because of this slow assistance coming from the West, but also we are angry because we had to retreat to take positions which were not fortified and equipped properly. And somebody from the government can say that everything is fine, but here is me talking from the front line. This is the fortified positions are not prepared. They are worse than the enemy has. I never entered their trenches, but I flew over them. And the third point that makes us angry is the lack of people in rotation. And I understand that perhaps somebody thinks that we are of iron, and it is difficult, but also there is fatigue in metal, and we also get tired, and we get smaller in numbers, and people get exhausted. We need support and mobilization of all the countries. I would like to emphasize all the country. It should not be a split. Somebody is leading a nice life in Kyiv, Lviv, or Dnipro, and the military have to fight. Presently, all the we have hostilities at Avdiivka. It's not a problem. It's not just as we just left it. We could protect the basements, defend use some dugouts. Now it's much more difficult because we have to stay in the field, and they took Avdiivka. And in closing, let me say that I do not follow any international news, but we have this feeling somehow that parts of the West are still hopeful that they can come to terms with our adversary, with Russia. Sign some papers, we can feel that. And according to our feeling, inner feeling, internal feeling, Putin can be only stopped with force. That's the only language he understands. The enemy can be stopped when we destroy them. Destroy with the tanks, with drones, with artillery. Then they have a challenge. They do not need Donbas, a couple of Ukrainian regions. He needs all the country, and perhaps Europe. And I'm crowning my speech with that because we are very expectant of the Western assistance. But it can so happen that there will be nobody to use that equipment. It should not come too late to Donbass or to Kyiv, but to Warsaw, and be used there to stop the Russian charges. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, and thank you for your honest and frank assessment from the front line. You should know that there have been several European countries have announced several fairly big support package additional in the last week. I think there is a gathering of European leaders called in Paris on Monday that is going to discuss further measures that can be taken. So further support will be coming. Yes, just let's hope that time is there and that production can be increased sufficiently fast. As I was beginning to say when there was the intermission, one of the interesting aspects of this war is, of course, the innovation that has been there in different new technologies and different efforts to help in that particular aspect. And we have two, and most of that have been done by the Ukrainians themselves, has to be said, but others have been helping. We have two entrepreneurs here who represent different aspects of that high-tech, innovative help. And let's hear from them. Start with Gudbert Scherf, who is CEO, co-founder of a German company, artificial intelligence, digital stuff, interesting. Let's hear from you.
Yeah, thank you, Carl. And first of all, before maybe commenting a little bit on the role of technology now in 2024, which I think is also changing a lot, I want to say the biggest sort of, I think, superpower, of course, that has made Ukraine fight against the tide is obviously the bravery of its men and women, and technology is nothing without that impressive bravery. And if anybody needs any encouragement, then I recommend talking to a couple of the veterans, because there's nothing more encouraging also for what we're doing. So really worth pointing out today. I think it's I think technology has played a huge role. Much has been said about it, but I think what's important to see is how this changes and evolves. And actually, General Clark alluded to this. One thing I find encouraging as a sort of a technology entrepreneur, if you talk about is the tide against Ukraine, the tide changes, every day, right? And actually, I think this has been a sort of David against Goliath challenge from the beginning. And the job, I think, as technologists we have is giving, David a slingshot. And the slingshot is changing over time. The beginning of the war, if we remember 2 years ago, tanks were rolling towards Kyiv in broad daylight. And that changed very quickly when the West, but also technology companies, ISI, and we were also involved, helped Ukraine get perfect transparency of its eastern flank in battlefield, processing that huge amount of data, doing that actually day by day, and giving perfect transparency, adding drones to the mix, ultimately creating, I think, today's front line where everything is 100% transparent on a 15-20 kilometer distance, which then led to the second wave where we're talking much more about Ukrainian innovation using drones to fight artillery. We talk a lot in the West about delivering artillery shells for good reasons, because they're needed. We talk way too little about how smart Ukraine has been using drones, software and AI to get them into target, not wasting rounds. It's impressive to see how efficient Ukraine is using that, and that is because of technology. Again, we talk a lot about the hardware, we talk way too little about how Ukraine is actually using that, using software and AI. And I think we're now in 2024, and my job is more to look forward and see what are the challenges ahead. And actually, I agree strongly with what General Clark said. Russia is fighting this technology war with electronic warfare. They've always been a strong player in electronic warfare. And that's quite a risky thing for two reasons. One, you can actually deny all of GPS, which is already happening. Ask any drone operator, they have never had GPS to target for a long time. So you need smart and intelligence on the drones to actually help you target, know where you are. But this war is not stopping. We're likely going to see comms denial in the next 6 to 12 months. Comms denial means you need even more smarts on the platforms to do the operation, do the mission. And so I think our sort of humble job as a sort of software AI company, along with partners here, is to take this ingenuity, creativity of how Ukraine is reinventing warfare and put it into software and AI. Because the modern way of how we basically do complex things is software. And the beauty is it's replicable, right? You can quickly scale it up. The one thing that's very different, and again, we need to change how we look at Ukraine in the West, I strongly believe, is we need a new form of partnership. Victor mentioned this, also in this area. Ukraine by now is not just a recipient of technology, nor should it be. It's actually a producer of technology, right? There's an ambition to build 1 million drones. I know a lot of the drone companies. We have strong collaboration with the government here on that. I think we should increasingly have foreign funding also available to support Ukrainian local companies so they can become more and more self-sufficient. And then two, add those components that we in the West have that are very difficult to replicate in the short term. Software and AI is one of those. And partner together and put those things together to really give that next slingshot for the next wave. And so I'm very proud that we can do that. I'm looking forward to actually signing a partnership today that will do that. I really think we should encourage Western governments to do that, not just in, provide Western equipment, but actually increasingly give those components, listen to what Ukraine actually wants. I think that will increasingly be high tech, and then also work with local companies in the ecosystem here to give build the next slingshot and make sure that the tide can be turned yet again, as has been for the last 2 years.
Thank you. You mentioned the company ISA, that Rafal Bodrzewski. That's a startup company, as a matter of fact. Not that old, but tell your story and your contributions.
Yes, sure. Thank you very much, Carl. Thank you very much for having me. And indeed, I've given it quite a lot of thought when I've received the questions on how can I contribute and what is the best way over here to share the story of ISI and to respond to the questions. So I believe it perhaps has been obvious to so many people in the room, and that's why this hasn't been mentioned, but when I received the question, is the tide against Ukraine today, the first thing that I have asked myself is, what do I think is going to happen in the long run? And I do want to say that if it counts, I personally believe genuinely and deeply that in the long run, we are going to win. We can define we as free, loving people. We can define we as Westerners. But I think this war is not just Ukrainian war, it's our Western world. I'm Polish personally, and I feel very deeply about this. So I did want to share with everybody that if people believe that things are difficult, they are. But at the end of the day, this is going to be won. So what happened in my story? 10 years ago, I decided to start a company which has embarked on a mission to build satellites. Those satellites, radar satellites, have been used in Ukraine for the last 2 years, and I'm extremely proud of that. What I have learned from that, and what venture capitalists very often tell you when you start a company, is they say, this is a marathon, not a sprint. And I believe this war is also a marathon, not a sprint. Perhaps at the beginning we thought it would have been a sprint, but it is not. Now, what we know from running companies and running marathons is that there are good times and there are bad times, and we have to recognize when we have the bad times. So now, when people ask me, do I believe the tide is against Ukraine? I don't know about the tide, but I think we have hit a rough patch, and that is the first thing that we should do. We should recognize that right now we are in a difficult moment. Carl has actually said something which was excellent, and it has been mentioned here before. When we hit a rough patch and difficult moment, and I've hit many of them, and we have fortunately persevered through, you have to recognize how this particular one is different from the one before and from the one next. And I believe what I'm hoping this panel is going to help us answer is, what kind of rough patch have we hit this time? And I think we have a difficulty at the battlefield, but I think this war is not only fought at the battlefield, it's only fought in the information space and in the technology space. And if I want to recognize what's difficult about this patch, is that we have to realize that yes, we have to talk about the front lines, but we also have to talk about the media front lines. How are we fighting this war in the information space? Because that's also where it is being won. And of course, the bit for me is how can we help win this battle by utilizing and leveraging what we have, and that's technological advantage. And I do think that if we do it correctly, we're going to win it faster rather than later. Thank you.
Thank you, and you could have told somewhat more about the impressive achievement that your satellites, small satellites that they're shooting up, and they are able to see virtually everything that is happening. So you have transparency on the battlefield, and since these particular satellites happen to be on our side, it means that there's transparency on everything that the Russians are up to, and that of course changes the face of the battle quite a lot. Before we proceed, and I think I go further to Wes Clark to get his further comments on the military side. Let's just make a couple of comments on my side, because I do think, and I think it was Wasley who said it, that a year ago there was over-optimism. There was the belief that you do a counteroffensive and you defeat the Russians and that's the end of it. Now there tends to be a swing somewhat too much in the other direction, that say can't be done and everything is difficult. Yes, it is difficult, but that's the way a war is. It swings back and forth, and there has been change, but the fundamentals haven't been changing that much. I tried to study what the Russians have been doing. And if you look at the different operations that the Russian army have been undertaking since the beginning of this particular war, I still fail to see a single really successful Russian military ground offensive. They have certainly been trying, but they have been failing time after time. They are inserting new manpower, but with lesser quality. More quantity and lesser quality. But so far, they have not been able to get their act together. They can certainly, with artillery, destroy cities and settlements. That is not really much of an achievement. But in terms of really doing sustained operations of an impressive character, we haven't seen that from the Russian side after 2 years of war. They are learning, but you are learning as well. So if the Russians have been improving somewhat, but not much, it's fairly obvious that you have been improving with the help of technology, with the help of the ingenuity, and the fact that you have the moral strength on your side. You have been improving even more. So, rough patch, certainly, but see it in the somewhat longer perspective. Back to Wes, who knows more about war than at least me.
Well, Carl, I just want to say that I think we have to be very careful in not underestimating Russian capacity for innovation. The Russian way of war is upside down from the way the West looks at it. We look at it and we know that the key to winning is the individual soldier, the man with the rifle, the man pulling the lanyard on the artillery. We believe it's morale, and this is the way Ukraine is fought. But Russia looks at it differently. In Russia, a human being is no different than an artillery projectile. You have 300,000 rounds of artillery, you have 300,000 people. You can use the artillery, you can use the people. You can replace the people. They don't matter. This is the Russian way of war. In the West, we plan in detail to save the lives of our soldiers. In Russia, they learned in World War II top down. So the low-level units in the Russian military are not given initiative. They're given orders. They're taught a drill. And this is at the company level, battalion level, and so forth. And so it's just routine and rote. But at the top, they can be quite innovative. So right now where we are is the Russian top command has not learned to synchronize combat power. If it knew how to do it, the breakthrough at Avdiivka would have happened a long time ago. They can't do it. But neither can we yet, on the Ukrainian side, synchronize combat power. You must have air superiority. You must mass your artillery. You must bring in your radio electronic reconnaissance and then your combat. You must use your satellites and blind their satellites and so forth. And it all has to be brought to a sharp focus at what in German is called the Schwerpunkt. Now, in World War II, when the Allies got ashore at Normandy, the British General Montgomery believed that he could punch through the German defenses in a straight line with a Schwerpunkt. He lost 2 armored divisions in the Battle of Cayenne. It took the Americans going around the west coast of France. They couldn't get through either. And finally, what happened? This was 8 weeks after the invasion. The Germans held a tough line, and the American generals planned for 2,500 aircraft and 22 battalions of artillery to fire simultaneously, or nearly simultaneously, on a strip of land 2 kilometers deep and 4 kilometers wide. And that was the breakthrough that led to the liberation of France. That kind of mass of combat power. Today it's much more complicated. You've got radio electronic combat, you've got the transparency of the battlefield, you've got drones, but to be able to mass like that, and I want to say this for the generals in Ukraine, you've got to know the strength of the battlefield and resist the political pressures for quick results, because you can't get quick results. You lose a lot of people when you try for quick results. You have to synchronize combat power. Bob, I did the training for most of the United States Army from 1984 to 1994. I was at the National Training Center twice in the Battle Command Training Program. I trained brigades, divisions, and corps. You can't do this in 5 weeks. It's not just about the individual training, it's about the company level, battalion level, division level. I've seen 2- and 3-star generals cry in training because they lost, and they often lost in our training exercises. I dare say when I briefed the Ukrainian military in 2016 on this, what the Ukrainian generals told me was, this training system doesn't work in Ukraine. But that was then. It will work now. You need a real training system at the top to be able to synchronize combat power. It took the Allies 2 years after Deep to bring that combat power together. And they were fighting in North Africa and Italy. The idea that you could stop fighting in Bakhmut and concentrate everything and bust through Zaporizhia, nuts, crazy. That wouldn't have worked. I know the Americans told you to do that. They were wrong. I know the Americans told you they gave you everything you needed. I'm sorry, I apologize for the Americans. We haven't given you air superiority. You cannot operate without air superiority. And that doesn't mean 20 F-16s. That means maybe a couple of 100 or 500 aircraft. Look, we're going to have courage as a civilization to confront Vladimir Putin, because he can't beat us, but he can frighten us into submission. So you've got to face the nuclear threats. You've got to belly up to the bar. We have 10,000 tanks in the United States. I don't know why it took us a year and a half to give 31 tanks to Ukraine. Ridiculous. There's a lot of let's say, prevaricating going on here. And you're fighting the battle for Western civilization. We can finish it here, or we can let you perish and pick it up globally with less results. So what we do here is decisive in my view, and we've got to do that. But in Ukraine, your senior leadership has got to synchronize combat power. You simply can't throw soldiers at the problem. Okay?
Thanks. Bob wants to say something. Before that, just say from my point of view, I don't know the details, but things are also happening that is fairly encouraging. I mean, the news this morning that I saw, correct or not, is that the Ukrainians, the one way or the other, have managed to shoot down another one of the A-50, the Russian highly sophisticated airborne command and surveillance aircraft. They are now down to 7 of them remaining, I think. And they've lost significant, because they lost one previously. These are among the most valuable assets that they have. And the fact that the Ukrainians have the ingenuity to reach very far, the one way or the other. Some information is saying that they adopted a fairly old Soviet long-range system. And they must have adopted it in some sort of very sort of innovative and brilliant
We don't know if it's true.
No, I don't know if it's true, but I assume it's true. Is it?
We don't know.
No, we don't know if it's true. We haven't a clue. But if it is true, and when they shot down their previous A-50, it turned out to be true. If it is true, this is something that really worries the General Staff in Moscow, because they are losing really critical assets. And if this continues, it will have an effect. Bob.
Just very briefly, and just to follow up what General Clark has been saying, it's always a pleasure to listen to him. Okay, just 2 or 3 brief points. I would just say that high-profile wins that play well in the media may not actually change the course of the war. One has to understand the style of battle that the Ukraine is now facing. Russia tried decisive warfare, it didn't work. So it is now trying attritional warfare, and that is the war that Ukraine is in. And what that means is killing 500,000 Russian soldiers is not a victory for you if you've lost 200,000 Ukrainians, because that will destroy your army in a way that it won't destroy the Russian army, which goes back to the argument that we're all having here about the role of technology versus mass. Okay? What the Russians can't do is what the Soviets did in the 1920s and 30s, which is reinvent warfare, deep battle, operational art, the sort of stuff that was still influencing the Americans and the Brits in the 1980s and 1990s, how you break through and you carry on breaking through. And these were arguments that came out of the Russian Empire's failure in World War I, hence the concept of deep battle. They can't do it, and as the General says, the Ukrainian High Command is also struggling with combined arms operations. And arguably, the army that learns combined arm operations is going to be the army that wins this war. Tech is a really important part of that. Do not underestimate mass. Because the Russians can't do combined arms, can't get everything to work at once, they rock up to a town, they flatten it. They trundle to the next town, they flatten it. It's not a way of war that is effective. It's not a way of war that is moral. It's a despicable, pathetic way of war. But it is trashing your towns slowly. And if you are not in the artillery battle and the first-person drone view battle, or if you can't close their comms down completely, this is what is going to happen. And so therefore it is important to understand the attritional war, and that although you need tech on your side and morale, you also need enough mass to counteract Russian mass. Just wanted to add those points. Thank you.
And that is, of course, true. But it's also maneuver war if you look at what's happening in the Black Sea. You can argue that there, the Ukrainians, who are inferior in every single respect, if you look on the paper, have been amazingly successful with very innovative ways.
Yeah, they have, and the grain war is an important part of this. The war in the occupied territories. This is total war. It's being fought with food supplies. It's being fought with oppression in the occupied territories. You've got an old-style conventional front. So you've got all the aspects of a form of total war that the Russians are fighting. Absolutely, yeah.
Good.
Ludmila, do you want?
Ludmila?
Or Ludmila, let me bring you in now with your testimony from really your experience in Ukrainian.
Дякую.
Thank you. To start off, let me appreciate every foreigner who've come to this meeting. You are brave people. You are courageous people. You have come to the country at war, the terrific war with the terrible enemy. I think that your close ones must be, worried, and you could have sent them text messages confirming that you are fine. Unfortunately, I can't text my son because he's perished, has sacrificed his life for the freedom and independence of my country. I brought up a good son. A mother who brought up a real hero has no right at the time of war to just sit and do nothing. This war has been going on for me for 10 years. I was separated in 2020. I have a disability. My body is maimed. Only one eye and only one ear keeps serving me. But on the 24th of February 2022, I joined the armed forces without much thinking because I have relevant experience. I am part of the stormtroop company. I'm chief master sergeant. I was at Bakhmut. I could see the city dying. When I was running to one position, they started shooting, and I had to fall flat. When I could raise my head, I see that it was a grave of a 2-year-old girl that saved me, protected my life. She was buried in the backyard of one building. Well, I developed resilience, but I'm still a tender person. I love my grandchildren. They haven't left Ukraine. They are in Ukraine. Having survived, I'd like to get this message to the rest of the world. The message of the terrible war we're fighting. You will probably tell me what I should say to myself. 3 days ago, I talked to guys from my unit there at Kyiv, and they asked whether they would help us because they didn't have fire support. And I told them, yes, they would. We'd have shells, we'd have armored vehicles. We're just a bit. We'll get F-16s. Yesterday, heavy artillery was used to erase their positions, and their remainders are somewhere in the field. Maybe they. But I did promise. Did I lie to them, or somebody is just taking too long? I'm trying to get this message across to you. There's a war going on in Europe. The war which is fought by Ukrainians. We don't ask you to fight for us instead of us, but please provide us with munitions, with equipment, with this enemy can only be defeated. You can't negotiate with them. You can talk to them. So when this event, this platform is over, please come to me and tell me if I had lied to my boys because I believed you or not. For someone, it's just stats. For us, it's our kids. The kids who had their diseases when their teeth were running, they are sacrificing their lives for us, for European interests, for European values. Thank you. Glory to Ukraine.
Thank you very much for that very moving testimony. I think it was, now we have some minutes more for the different panelists. I think Gunbert wanted to say something.
Yeah, so I think, the key thing maybe, I think I just want to get across, since it's sort of like the third year now, is that I really think we need to realize, one, Ukraine is fighting for us, especially in Europe, but for the whole Western world. And I think that's something we still need to realize that's for us, but two, also, people here are just getting on with things, and I think we need to change. Really, I want to get that across, this thinking that we somehow in the West have the solutions, and we just need to slice sort of like the solutions and pass them over step by step. I think this was said earlier very well. The slow yes. I think actually the more humble position that I would say is we're going to increasingly find that Ukraine is also innovating for us. And there are things that we're going to see on the battlefield that I would like to ask the European armies, who actually has the solutions for that? So what if we actually see large-scale drones coming also on the Russian side? Because who says that Russia does not innovate? What if we actually see that taking out air defenses? If you look at the impact that Shahed has had, who actually feels ready for that? Which navy actually feels comfortable looking at, in this case, the Russian Blackfeet, and wondering what whether they can resist a similar attack. So I think there needs to be a more partnership. I come back to that point of realizing Ukraine is fighting for us, but they're also innovating. And actually, we are now, if General Clark is right, and this is going to go on for much longer, we're even more in this together, and we actually need to do all we can and just get on with it, and less think that we are somehow just slicing our support. And also, by the way, update our debate a little bit. I do think air support is obviously critical, but there's other debates next to F-16s that also need to be had, and I think they are increasingly important, and it's just a matter now of getting on with it, but also listening a lot more to Ukraine. I feel we're sometimes a little tone deaf, and I think hopefully, this is obviously the group of friends. Hopefully we can carry this also back into Europe, because the debate there is often very different from what I see actually here.
Thank you. And I also want to give the opportunity to you in the audience, if you have any comment or any questions to anyone in the panel, which so far is not the case. Or is it?
Hi, Tobias Elwood, Member of Parliament. A real pleasure and an honour to be here. And again, pleased to be here with such a large UK delegation. General Clark, you mentioned or implied perhaps the delay in the Americans joining in the fight in the Second World War, and that was much appreciated. Many of us attended the Munich Security Conference, and it became very clear that there was a disjoint between a lot of the European leaders and the peoples of the countries that they represented. I have absolutely no doubt that landing in Poland and coming here, that everybody thinks this is a European war. You go back to the UK, and this is my position, but certainly in France and Germany and so on, they don't think this is a European war. They think this is a Ukrainian war. The penny hasn't dropped that Ukrainians are fighting for us. And until that happens, until we persuade the peoples of those countries, you won't get Taurus missiles coming from Germany. You won't get the necessary equipment and those expenditure, the $60 billion coming from the United States. Sorry to labor the point, but I had a go at a Nebraska senator at the Munich Security Conference, because we were all puzzled there as to how the United States could tie in what's going on here, the commitment of supporting Ukrainians, the challenge that Russia is doing to redraw the map of Europe with migration issues on the New Mexico border. We couldn't understand that. And I think the message went back to America to recognize that we're all in this. Ukrainians are doing the fighting. Until we give them the necessary equipment, then Russia will be able to claim success.
So, Carl, may I answer that for just a moment? I want to use the analogy of Lord of the Rings, because that seems to communicate here in this environment. You have the Eye of Sauron in Western political systems. Mr. Putin has deeply embedded himself in the American political system and in European political systems. And we have to recognize that the transparency and openness that we're all fighting for is used and abused by Mr. Putin. So almost 200 years ago, a Frenchman came to the United States when America was the first democracy, and he marveled at the initiative of the people. but he warned that in terms of foreign policy, democracies would never be able to match the strategies and stratagems of monarchies, because in the democracies they turn over every so often, and you're focused on the citizenry. This is the real challenge. When President Biden said it's a war between democracy and autocracy, I think, I just want to say, as a retired military guy who did run for political office and somebody who's not worried about his political future, I want to call on the political leaders of the Western democracies to show some courage. Show some courage. Show some courage. Get your internal security in order and stop the Russian subversion, starting in the United States inside the Republican Party. It's just now starting to come out in the press. And don't think it isn't in your countries elsewhere. And of course, in Ukraine, you know very well what the issue is. But secondly, can a democratically elected leader mobilize his people in a time of war? Franklin Roosevelt couldn't do it in 1940, and that's why we stood by and let Britain be bombed. Joe Biden hasn't done it yet in the United States, and he sees it, and he knows what it is. He can't make it happen yet. You in Ukraine have to take the lead and help our democratic leaders convey to their people the message of what this war is about. This is about the information space, which several people have talked about, but we're not winning that battle. We haven't won it in the global south. We don't have our friends in Dubai and the Emirates supporting our sanctions against Russia. We don't have India conclusively saying, we don't want Russian oil. We want oil from free countries, not from enslaved countries. We don't have the support of the world democratic community. That's on us. That's on us. So you're exactly right in what you say, but I think, this is a time for honesty. When I was here 2 years ago, it was a time for sort of jubilation as we were rolling back the Russian forces. This is a time for honesty. If we're going to win, we've got to be honest, starting with ourselves. And that means our political leaders have to have the courage to mobilize public opinion and forces as necessary. Thank you.
Another American voice, John Herbst there. No, John, okay.
Okay, my name is Emmanuel Zingeris. I'm a descendant of Holocaust family. My mother stood in the Stuttgart concentration camp. Her name was very strange among the Jewish people. She was named Tatarsky. My mother named Tatarsky. I met the fantastic Crimea people just yesterday, thank you. And I would like to say that she is spending years and years in Nazi camp. Look to the sky, Carl. She looked to the sky and flying British and American bombers to bomb Dresden and Leipzig, and that's every day they back looking to the capo and the Gestapo guys on the fence of concentration people, begging the God that they will bomb the fence, the Nazi fence in the concentration camp. Everything came too late. The camp was annihilated by Nazis, and one from 300 people survived. This late turn in the Second World War, late turn from the Western Allies, and now the late turn, our late turn to support Ukraine is so deeply shocking for the people who still have 20th century in the heart. And from my experience in the Baltic countries, who was never recognized in our captivity in Soviet Union, never recognized by the West that we are captive and occupied by Soviets, and we every day try to search our blood that we not become like Soviet people. We would like to say today that we should make a call to our people Carl, our people in the United States, Lithuanian Americans, Polish Americans, Irish Americans, who created United States through the centuries and asked them to be active, go to their members of Congress and stop this surreal Kafkanian landscape in the castle of democracy on Capitol Hill. That should be stopped. And secondly, after this call, we should unite ourselves against our native crooks. I'm sorry, in Lithuania, in Italy, in Britain, from time to time, even here in Ukraine, who are making trade with Russian military industry. And we should create steps preventing our societies to be tolerant to the firms who are making illicit business and avoiding and circumventing the sanctions. That is the huge basic thing for our society, to condemn every guy who making business on the blood of Ukrainians. Thank you.
And John Herbst,
this is in response to our British colleague.
Former US ambassador to here.
The problem we have in the framing of the war in Ukraine is that we frame it as the war in Ukraine. Therefore, it's perceived, especially by people in the United States who are not focusing on foreign policy, that this is not an American problem. If we frame it precisely, we have an aggressive nuclear superpower who has identified the United States as its principal adversary, if not its enemy. And every day, senior Russian officials, Narishkin, Putin, the Russian media, Solovyov, Simonyan, talk about the nasty things they want to do to the United States. If we understand that this is a problem of containing an aggressive Kremlin, not a problem of helping the poor Ukrainians, the response will be very different. We need a policy of containment of an aggressive Russia, which is actually going to set the way for a more dangerous, aggressive China. We frame it that way, we can win this fight. Last Wednesday, before the Munich conference, the Atlantic Council organized with 10 other think tanks on Capitol Hill a conference advocating containment of Russia as an American policy. We need to make this, our leaders have to start pointing this out every day. The White House has to do this. Our leaders in Europe have to do this. If repetition is a way to get this message across, we do that, we can change the debate. Thank you.
Here, Mr. Gala from the European Parliament, here, there.
Thank you very much. Michael Gala, Standing Rapporteur on Ukraine in the European Parliament, and also on the 50 billion Ukraine facility package. I would like to start on a more positive note, because I can report that the European Union, with 2 months delay because of Viktor Orban's veto still in December, now we are next week finalizing the 50 billion package in the Parliament, and the Commission promised to pay the first tranche of these 50 billion first week of March. So that is only, of course, the civilian part. That is the budget support that the country keeps running. I think on the military aspects, there are some outrageous facts inside the European Union that the larger part of ammunition that is being produced currently as we speak is not going to Ukraine. And I think we have to end that. Commissioner Breton told me already months ago, well, we are producing the 1 million shells, but they are bound in other treaties. So what I would like to ask all our governments and the industry concerned is very precisely to get into contact with the destination countries of those weapons and ask them, on demand from them, to wait a little bit, because they are not in the war, but to allow it to be transferred to Ukraine. And if they are not volunteering, they should threaten there will be no next delivery if you are not agreeing that Ukraine now gets what they need now. I think that is the way forward in short term. That was quite successful at the beginning of the war, when 2 Iris-T units that are now serving, I think, around Kyiv, they were designed for Egypt. And then the German government managed with Egypt to delay it or to give it directly to Ukraine. That should be the standard procedure now for all the ammunition that is produced in Europe, or perhaps also in the US, where you are delivering elsewhere, and prioritize Ukraine. I think that is should be our common, very practical task now.
Thank you. We are running out of time, but Bob and Oleksandr Kamyshin.
Thank you, Mr. Bild.
Okay, 4 sentences. One, I think Putin has, in his military doctrine, developed a new sense of total war. There's a full spectrum of effects, whether it's in Capitol Hill, whether it's in the banks in the city of London, whether it is in the killing fields of Donbass. So we have to face up to that total war. Secondly, this may well be one part of a 3-part global conflict. So in the Middle East, in Ukraine, and potentially future in Taiwan. I completely buy what the ambassador said about the containment policy. We need containment for China, probably, and we certainly need containment for Russia. Just the lack of supply and the failed promises, I'm actually ashamed. I think it's absolutely appalling and just unforgivable. And I know, having been on a front line many years ago when people were trying to mortar you, and we were waiting for a NATO plane, a French plane that kept missing the target, I know that sense of urgency when you're waiting for somebody to do a job that's going to help keep you alive. And so in a very, very modest way, it's a very different war that we were fighting then, and one with many fewer casualties, unlike the horrendous front line you've got here. I just absolutely understand the soldiers' frustration that they are dying because they're not getting kit from us. There's no risk to our lives immediately. We're just not getting the kit to them. So I hope all the parliamentarians here, but also the Brits as well, we will go back with a renewed sense of actually we need to be giving you the tools to finish the job, because otherwise your soldiers are dying needlessly, and that is immoral as well as helping you lose the war. So thank you.
Thank you. First, I would kindly ask the technical team to put the image on the screen. Then I would tell that the air superiority concept I heard from General Clark is something that was new for me when I started my position in the ministry, and that's something I learned well in the Roosevelt room in the White House when we expected the meeting with my president and President Biden. So there were several flags of different forces, military forces of US, and you know what? There were stripes, every stripe for every single military campaign for every force. So on Air Force, there are times more stripes than on any other flag. That's where I learned that air superiority is crucial. And we can't reach it with jets produced in Soviet Union or in Ukraine. No one expects jets produced in Ukraine now. But we can, and of course we expect for F-16, but we can try to reach air superiority with drones, and that would be the first time in the history where we'll try to reach it with something newly produced, drones. You know that my president established the new commandment for unmanned forces. And this year would be a great challenge to build it up. Meanwhile, we got, and I expect the picture will come on the screen right now, right? Okay, yeah. So this one is the training tracks of naval drones, which would be soon hitting the remnants of the Russian fleet in Black Sea. So that's how we fight the tide. Thank you.
Thank you. And we conclude where we started with the Deputy Speaker.
I will be very shortly. First of all, Bob, and other colleagues from our from parliaments, from our LS. Next, our agreed task in parliament is mobilization law. You know, it's our next task. Yesterday we voted last law to Euro integration, to open in negotiation framework. And our next task only mobilization. And on this example, I want to ask all of you, our allies from all over the world, from Western world, don't give up, because not only because of values and our great things, but in memory of guys who lost their lives on front line, and in memory of our civilians who lost their lives in in their homes in terms of shelling. We also can do our small job. We can open this huge amendments law with 4,000 amendments, but we deal with it. We overcome with it. If it will be 1 week or 2 months, but we deal with it, because we need to give rest to Igor and to his brothers in trenches. We need to give honest and friendly mechanics to conscript to all people in Ukraine, because you know we have some problems in perception this process. But I'm very agree with General Clark about necessary of rethinking about training process. Because training is first stage of working, it's first stage of fighting, and we need to rechange all this process to give them new breeze, to make them very attractive, very efficient, and to give all our people who should to be conscript very understanding way how it will be. But we deal with it, and we ask you, don't give up, and please help us to deal with other problems, with supplies, with information war that very, very active all over the world. We need the support of Western world in terms of dozens of elections this year, and we need to have common position in all these elections. I don't think about some politician, I think about existential, that we need to keep support Ukraine all over the world. Thank you, Carl, for your brilliant moderation.
And thank you,